Hello and welcome to today's Missio Nexus webinar. I'm Heather Pubels, the founder of Leitmotif, a communications consulting firm and Missio Nexus member organization. I'm partnering with Missio Nexus to discover topics and find effective presenters that can address ways mission agencies can improve their marketing and communications efforts. Before we get started with the webinar, I want to let you know that Missio Nexus has a cohort called Communications Director and Staff. If you are involved in marketing or communications with a mission agency, this cohort is for you. It's a great place for you to meet, learn from, and be encouraged by others in your domain. At the end of this webinar, I'll give you instructions on how to find and sign up for that cohort. For today, Audrey Reeves of Kumveka will be presenting our webinar entitled, Does Your Marketing Matter? Audrey Reeves is a strategy director for Kumveka, a nonprofit marketing and branding agency that serves faith-based ministries. Audrey is experienced in corporate communications, has a background in crossing cultures, and is passionate about helping ministries communicate in clear and compelling ways. She currently resides in Richmond, Virginia, with her husband and 3 children. You can learn more about the organization Audrey works for, Kumveka, online at kumveka.org.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that intro, Heather. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I really appreciate you giving up time from your day to be with us. And I really hope this is a profitable conversation. I know we're in Zoom format, so I absolutely wish I could see all your faces and interact in a room. So as you're willing and able to come off video and interact, I absolutely invite that. But feel no pressure. You're welcome to sit back and take it in as well, and put questions in the chat box as they come up. So as Heather said, the title of our webinar today is Does Your Marketing Matter? Putting marketing in its valuable place is the narrative we're going to try to dig into a little bit together. And like Heather said, I'm with Kumveka. We are a nonprofit marketing agency. We do research, branding, and communications. Research, branding, and marketing, sometimes called communications. And so it's just delightful to be with you guys today. I have a colleague actually on the call as well. Dan Kennedy is our executive director. And so he may jump in at a couple points. It's fun to have a bit more interaction at times. So you'll also be hearing from him. So as we get started, I would actually love to learn a bit more about who's in the room and some of your perspectives on a couple of these questions before we actually jump into our content today. So Mary Kay is going to help us do some Zoom polling. And so the first one is really straightforward. What area you are in right now? Your role is primarily in. Okay, fantastic. So looks like largely communications and marketing, no huge surprise there, but definitely some development, operations, and some other leadership. Fantastic. So that's great. That just gives us a sense of who's in the room. It makes sense that we're all interested in these questions. Mary Kate, go ahead to the next question when you're able to. So the next ones will be statements that you get to react to. And you can choose to strongly disagree, to strongly disagree. And somewhere in the middle, you can actually say you're not sure. So as soon as Mary Kay gets there, you'll see the first statement is going to be, my organization is clear on how we measure the success of our marketing. Okay, fantastic. So clear on how we measure the success of our marketing. No in the strongly agree column, and then kind of split among those middle 3 with some disagree to that statement. So that's really helpful. A few people not sure how to answer that. That's totally fine. Fantastic. Mary Kay, let's keep going with your next question. So one of the things we're going to be talking about today really relates to how we measure success in our marketing. And so it's obviously a need that's out there. Okay, so that seems to be the same question. Maybe there's another one in there somewhere. And if it's not working, Mary Kay, I'm very happy to move on. And maybe we can come back to these at some point. Okay. I'm thinking maybe we take a minute on the poll. There's a few more questions we were going to do, and they're not coming up, so that's fine. I'll actually close this. Mary Kay, jump on if you want to revisit these questions, but I'm going to push us on here. So this is what you signed up for. Does your marketing matter? And the two questions we're really going to dig into today are about, is your marketing furthering your organization's mission? So I would imagine that everybody on this call who's working for a mission agency, a nonprofit, you're really excited to be doing your work because you are excited about the mission of your organization. So answering the question of how your marketing is impacting that mission is very important and foundational. And so we're going to talk about some tools to think through that today. And the second one, which maybe is talked about less, is how do you help others see the value of your marketing efforts? And so I think anecdotally from working with a lot of ministries, this is something we have run into quite a bit, is that sometimes within organizations, it can be hard for everyone to understand the role of marketing, and then for that reason, maybe to value it. So these are kind of the big framing questions we're going to try to dig into today. Certainly not answer them fully, but begin the conversation. And to get to these things, we have kind of three sections we're going to talk through, and each of them has its own framework that we're going to offer. And we won't go through it fully today, but it'll be in the deck that you'll get at the end of the call. And certainly has a template format that you can actually work to fill out on your own. And so the three things we're going to talk about underneath this heading is anchoring in your mission via key metrics. The second one is defining your lane, which gets at marketing objective. And then the third one is really how we get there. And that's going to be digging into the idea of a marketing funnel. So I'm going to keep going here. The first section is going to be anchoring in your mission. And so the quote that I think will help set the tone for this, it says, if you don't know what you're aiming for, you'll never miss, but you'll also never know if you hit it. And so this, of course, just gets at the importance of actually declaring what we're about as an organization and how we know what success looks like. And the implications really for us on this call is that I believe these key metrics should impact every aspect of our brand and our marketing. And I think you'll see how that works as we dig into these a bit more. So the framework we like to use, I'll get to in a second. There's principles first, really important just to lay the groundwork that measurement can be a really good thing. Sometimes in the ministry space, we can shy away from that. Maybe it feels too corporate. Maybe we're just not sure how to do it. But measurement is great for making sure we're stewarding our resources well. But we need to be careful to measure the right things. So there's tons of different ways you can measure. There's KPIs out there and all sorts of things. But how do we actually know what is important to measure? And in the context of ministry, we also have to keep in mind that our job is the inputs, and that there are true outputs that really don't have anything to do with us. So when we're talking about transforming lives, changing hearts, we know that there's nothing as an organization we can do to actually make those things happen. We set up systems and we do programs and we meet people in ways that we hope that'll happen. But there are ultimate things in our organizations that we know are not ours. So it's helpful to say that, to maybe take that anxiety off the table, that we're not talking about measuring transformational ministry, that is really out of our control. But the other thing that's important to remember is that focusing on a few things provides clarity for everyone. So in a world where we're pulled in so many different directions, there's issues that we find out about every day that we need to engage with. There's always changing scenarios. Having clarity on what we're about and what we're going after is really the best way to stay focused. And I think this bringing simplicity out of complexity is actually key to leadership. So as you lead your team, as you lead your organization, being able to say, hey, this is the thing we're about, we're going after these things, actually is kind, and it offers clarity to everyone. So the framework that we're going to speak about related to key metrics, we like to break into two sides. So there's a ministry model side and a financial model side. And this obviously is especially helpful in the world of nonprofits. because you do have a ministry and a mission that's very central to why you exist. But on the financial side, if you want to keep doing that mission next week, 3 months from now, you actually have to have a way to fund that mission. And so that is equally important. So we live in a world where both of these are needed. Both of them have to be working well in order for us to fulfill the God-given mission that we've been given. And so the measure progress towards your mission on the left, and measurable progress towards sustainability under the financial side on the right. And as we think about how to figure out what these might be, it's really our mission, like I said, that's driving the ministry model, and our funding that's driving the financial model. And I won't spend time really digging into this today, but it's just helpful to note as you're thinking about marketing and brand, that at a simplistic level, you can point to the outcomes of the ministry model actually driving a lot of aspects of your brand, whereas the financial model drives a lot of how you're going to plan and execute against marketing. So kind of plant that thought. It's a much bigger conversation to unpack, but it is helpful to know that both of these are really in play. So what are we talking about when we say ministry model versus financial model? And we'll just use an example of a well-known organization like Compassion International, and imagine what their metrics might be. So on the ministry side, the idea of children being released from poverty is what they're about. And so that their metric might be the number of children each year that are released from poverty. That's how they know their mission is coming true. On the financial side, of course, it's actually about child sponsorships. And so the number of child sponsorships is the financial driver that allows them to keep doing that mission. So there's ministry and financial. Another example would be a Christian school. So this is a school in Virginia, and their ministry model is all about students that reflects their portrait of the graduate. So as they graduate students that have been shepherded and discipled and taught in a certain way, that meets their ministry model. That is their mission coming alive. But on the right-hand side, they need to have students enrolled to actually pay for that ministry to happen. So the financial key metric is going to be students enrolled. Our Daily Bread Ministries is an organization we've had the pleasure of working with for quite a few years. And I'm actually going to call on Dan for a second to talk about this one. They're a client that he's had time to work with quite a bit. There's Dan.
Hi. Yeah, so the case study here is really fantastic. As we have done work for them for the last 3 or 4 years, they're just a great epitome of like an organization that is really missional. So they think deeply about this idea of a ministry model, and they care, linking back to the vision and mission statement, this idea of spiritual growth. Like you read it and then you translate that to say like, well, what does that look like if that was quantified, as in all the caveats that Audrey's already given. And so they believe strongly in this. And then there's the other side of it, which is like, we want to keep doing this tomorrow. And there is a subscriber model that is linked to a really, really gentle donor ask. And like, that's really what keeps them going as an organization. And then just my one kind of caveat to this is that it's been beautiful to watch them make really hard choices about when they're going to prioritize the ministry model over the financial model. And it's not always the right choice, but I just really have been impressed with, frankly, their level of like leadership and discipline in pursuing thinking like this when it comes to key metrics. Is that helpful, Audrey?
That's great. Thank you. Fantastic. So the next couple slides, I'm going to go through pretty quickly because they basically are going to show how you would get to these key metrics. If this is not a vernacular you have in your organization, if it's not something you can answer quickly, there's some great exercises that you can go through as a team, as a leadership team to get to these. And it starts really with listing the ways that you see your mission coming to life and coming true in the life of one person. And then you would list all those out, get all the ideas on the table, you would prioritize them and begin to rank them. And then once you have your top couple, you can start actually putting measures to them. So maybe it's planting churches is what you're all about. And so the measure for that is number of churches planted. Receiving biblical training is how you know your mission's coming true. That might be measured by number of certificates given or classes completed. maybe feeling loved in the process is really important to your mission. And so you have to think about creative ways, like how can you measure that? Well, maybe there's a survey, there's a rating that people can give. And so it's all about really prioritizing those things and then thinking about how to actually measure them. And there's a similar process, of course, on the financial key metric side, where you go through a brainstorming exercise, list all the ways your financials could be impacted, rank them, figure out which ones really are key, where do you go to for your funding, what's really important, and then begin to put measures against those. So in a very similar way, maybe it's retaining current donors. And so that looks like a percentage of your current donors that are retained. Acquiring new donors is also a very common one. Or it might be appeal of your message, which you could measure via Net Promoter Score, a very industry standard way to get at that. So these are obviously in the deck, and it's a fantastic exercise to really think through what these might be. For our, we're going to kind of run through the webinar today with a fictitious organization with just some samples of these two things to kind of think how they're going to work. And so in this one, the mission of this organization, they really want to see communities impacted. And so number of communities impacted is a very vague key metric. I would actually push that this gets defined a little bit more. But we're actually focusing more on the financial model key metric today for our marketing work. And so just for the sake of argument and to keep it simple, we're going to say that number of participants in short-term projects is a metric that they want to go after, that is somehow tied to long-term donors and investment in their model. And so getting people into those projects is actually what they're about. So these are really just 4 examples. There's 1,000 ways these could be better or different, and your organization might do something really different. But we're going to jump in and kind of think about, what do we do? Once we have these key metrics, great, like what do we do with these and how does it help us as marketers? So at any point, if you all have questions or you want to push on any of the points we're talking about, I've given Heather full reign to interrupt and let me know what's in the chat, because I'm not really able to monitor it while we're going through. So if there's anything now, that's great. If not, I will keep going. Great. So we've done number 1, talked about key metrics, which is really all about anchoring what we're doing into the mission of our organization. That is why we're getting up in the morning. That is why we're in the roles we're in. And so knowing that we're impacting the bottom line of what we really want to see happening in organizations, it's super important. The next section we're going to go to is we're calling Define Your Lane, which gets at talking about your marketing objective. And so the question that we're hoping to ask here is really, how do you define success for your marketing? And I think from a question at the beginning, I think this is probably an area where we all can do a better job and spend more time investing in how to answer this question. And so the framework that we're going to use today to help get at this is an audience journey map. And so this is a super generic template that has the idea of your target audience is the person you're serving. And so we're not going to talk about it today, but persona work is something we love to do with our clients, where you really talk about who is the person who you're primarily serving, and what are they about and what are their needs. And so that person is the center of this map. And on the left, we have current state, and on the right, we have key metric. And so they're somewhere today. Through interacting with your organization, you actually want them to be in a different place. You want them to be over here in the key metric. And we're going to talk about how they get from the point on the left to the point on the right. So for our fictitious example, we are going to talk about that prospective participant and their journey. So on the left, the participant has never heard of your organization. They don't know who you are. They don't know you exist. And on the right, after they've gone through this journey, they actually are ready to participate in a short-term project, which, if you remember from the first section, that was our financial key metrics. So that's what we're going for. We know we need to do that to keep our model running. So let's think about how the participants get from point A to point B, way on the right. And so the way you would do this exercise, and again, we're not going to take time to do this right now, but I'd encourage you afterwards, when you download the presentation, This really is something you can do together with a team. And we love to use sticky notes for it, or you can do it on a big white piece of paper on the wall. But you would have each person actually write down significant milestones in this journey. So you know people that have been on this journey that haven't heard of you and end up doing a short-term project. Think about, how did that happen? How did they go from not knowing anything about you all the way to deciding to spend 2 weeks or a month doing something with your organization? And so once you brainstorm those things, everyone gets to share, get all the ideas on the table. You might generate a list that looks something like that. So perhaps this person hears about your organization through church, and then they go check you out on your website. They might come back in a couple of days and follow you on social media. And maybe they see something there on your website that they decide to download, an interesting document about serving in the area that you serve in. So they decide to sign up for your email list. They're like, I really want to know what this organization's doing. I'd like to stay in touch with them. So they do that. They end up finding you at an event. I've heard there are these things called events. They kind of went away for a while, but I think they're coming back. That's exciting. So maybe they come to an event, and at that event, they actually request information from someone on your mobilization team. They want to find out more about what it means to participate in this project. They end up submitting an application, going through interview process, they get selected, and then they confirm their participation. So all this are just examples, but you get the idea. There's actually a lot of steps that happen between them not knowing anything about you all the way till they're ready to make this decision. And so what does any of this have to do with marketing and key metrics? How do we tie this together? So the question you want to ask, once you have this journey map fleshed out, you really want to think about which part of this actually belongs to marketing. Because it's very likely that actually the whole journey may not be influenced primarily by marketing. And so as we think about this example we're doing today, one way to slice it is that everything in bold that we talked about, that may really be influenced by the marketing team. But that piece, after they request information from the mobilization staff, all those steps are actually handled by a different team. That's really not marketing at that point. That's the recruiter or the mobilization team that walks the applicant through those steps. And so it's just helpful to declare success for your marketing team is not actually getting all the way to that key metric, but it is going to be handing off leads to your mobilization team. And that might look like via email, via event traffic, via phone calls. There's lots of ways that could happen. But actually knowing and defining, actually, this is what we're about. This is the thing we're going after. All of our efforts need to align to this is super helpful. And so as we think through this, probably your mind is starting to spin about what this journey might be in your organization. So I'll flip through just a couple examples of other types of key metrics. So this might be someone who's never heard of your organization, and then they end up becoming a regular donor. And you can think about all the steps that have to happen for them to get to that point. Another one might be someone has never heard of you and they end up becoming a member of your association. Super important for your financial metric. How did they get there? What are all the steps? Or maybe it looks like they don't know about you and they end up purchasing resources, whether it's online or at an event or some kind of subscription. They've made a purchase from you. There's lots of different ways this could look. And as you dig in, just a reminder that the whole point of this is to begin to define what is the space that marketing plays in your organization, and what is the end goal? Where is that point that you end up handing off? And I would say maybe 90% of the time, it's going to be some kind of lead to another team that then walks that person through the rest of their journey. Fantastic. I'm going to take a sip of water. And if there's any questions, Heather, you can jump in now. And if not,
thanks for this.
Go ahead.
Thanks for this so far, Audrey. I was really struck just by your last thing where you're talking about what does the marketing department actually own. And I think that's really helpful because I think sometimes when people are working on marketing and communications teams, sometimes their leaders hold them responsible for things that are not their part. And I like how you've just clarified, like marketing is about generating the leads that then another department picks up and creates, the final end result that we're all looking for. So this is good, really good. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I do think I think one of the big questions we're trying to get at today is about the perception of marketing in your organization, and do leaders value marketing? And I think part of that really does come down to, does everyone understand what marketing's role is? And if it's vague, if it's just unclear, if it's kind of this black box that you go off and do, it feels really possible that people won't value it because they don't understand what you're going to. Yeah, thanks for that. Great. I'm going to keep going into the next section. Actually, before we do that, I'd love Dan to weigh in on the comment Heather just made. If you have any other color to add to this section, I would love to hear it.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that a lot of what we're talking about is like, what is marketing responsible for? And I think, I do think it's helpful to, in some ways, bifurcate the world of like, you've got like marketing, which is trying to get these like leads or getting to that marketing objective and what role it plays primarily in the financial model. But there's another whole world that oftentimes gets lumped into marketing because the skill sets are similar but not the same, which is the world of brand. And I know you'll talk more about it later as we get into the marketing funnel, but I just want to like advocate for like brand is going to impact all of this. And even outside of what the marketing group does. And so I think there just also has to be a key thinking towards who is actually owning and stewarding the brand itself. Because you can like smash people with marketing, but if you do that at the sake of, call it the reputation or the perceptions of who you are as an organization, that's where brand comes in. That's where brand like stewardship and management comes in, and not just in the like, and of course, I'll just say like the brand is just a beautiful expression of who you really are, to include expressions such as your logo and color palette and typography and the words that you choose. And that can be like intentionally designed, and I mean that like strategically as well as creatively, but it also has to be stewarded as well. And so I guess the other thing I would just even advocate for is, yes, you should have metrics towards like how do we measure marketing? But I would argue that there should be metrics towards how do we measure our brand and the health of a brand. Maybe that's a different webinar, but I would just say like that's like one more set of things that is often lumped on our colleagues who are in the marketing space, especially in ministries, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Audrey and Dan, let me just jump in with a quick question here from Sherry Lee. She is saying marketing is a term that not all ministries like to use. Do you have a replacement term that you suggest for ministries?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have a suggestion. I mean, I feel like the one that we see a lot is communications. That feels like oftentimes that feels like a safer word in the Christian space. Dan, I don't know if you have other counsel on that.
Yeah, and I totally get it. Like I absolutely get where that comes from. And the truth is like, like marketing, of course, is just a tool, right? It's just a tool, and it's really not the thing itself, but it's how you use it. And so I guess I'll answer the question, like in some ways I hate to, like we all, like part of it like bothers me, right? Because like, oh my gosh, no, actually marketing done really well is a ministry. Like it's loving people by giving them like the message at the right time that invites them into like a beautiful experience, frankly, with your ministries. And so part of me just like, I think I bristle a little bit. I'll work through that. But I guess the other like maybe term I might use is like, it's about engagement. Like that's another way to think about marketing is finding, and it's like we're finding new people to engage. Okay, we're gonna call them leads. We're gonna find people who are kind of in our mix and we want them to engage further. Okay, well that's cultivation or whatnot. So it's a good question. It's actually a pretty good lead maybe into your third section, Audrey. Not to close down questions, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's funny, as we prepared for this webinar too, there's an aspect where we realize that most of the people on this call, like one of your jobs is actually marketing within your organization. And I think your question really speaks to that, which is, hey, like we're up against perceptions that actually maybe aren't fair or aren't accurate. And even like what your work is called seems to be, it's fair to say that's one of those. So definitely something to be aware of what it looks like to be compassionate even to your colleagues, and to talk about your work in ways that connect with them, and make sense and feel like they fit into the mission of your organization. So I really appreciate that question. And I do hope some of the tools that we're working through today may give you some new ways of explaining what you do and why it's valuable. Okay, so our third section, we're going to introduce the idea of a marketing funnel. There's obviously, this is not a new concept. There's many ways to do this. But what I really want to do is actually kind of begin to tie together the three areas we've talked about today. So we have key metrics, which is really anchoring back to our organization's goals and what is our mission? How do we keep doing it through our financial metrics? And then really boiling down to, great, within those things, what is the role of marketing? What should I be held accountable for? What is my contribution to this organization through my work? And this third section, we're going to get more specific, like within marketing. So if I said, this is my objective, great, how do we get there? How do we have a plan that helps me know I'm investing my time and the time of my team well? There's obviously, there's just always more things we could do. And there's always more expectations about what a communications or marketing team can do in an organization. So having a plan for how you'll choose what's in and what's out and what you spend time on and what you don't is super important. So that's where we're going here. And so the big question we're asking in this section is, what are the stages for moving your audience towards your marketing objective? And so if you think back to the framework we used of the audience journey, the stages are going to be whatever that section was that we said belonged to marketing. And this journey is essentially going to become our marketing funnel. So if you see these colored bars at the beginning, what we're going to do is we're going to take them and we're going to move them 90 degrees. We're going to turn them and turn it into a marketing funnel. So it's all the same. We're talking about the same journey, but we're going to do it vertically now so that we can actually start talking about the different sections, like what are those stages? And for the sake of argument, for the sake of our example, we're going to pick 3 pretty standard stages of a marketing funnel, starting with awareness, moving into consideration, and then usage. And then at the end of this funnel, the output, like what comes out of the bottom, is going to be that objective. And so in this case, it's the number of leads. So it's helpful when you start thinking about a marketing funnel to understand who in your audience fits into each bucket. And so one way to do that brings a lot of clarity is to have questions in each section, in each stage of the funnel, have questions that if your audience says yes, you know that that's the section they're in, that's the stage they're in. So to be in the awareness part of your funnel, they would say yes to the question, have you heard of this organization? Yes, I've heard of you. Great. So now they are aware. They are at the very top of your funnel. They went from not being aware yesterday to actually knowing who you are. They've heard your name. They've heard maybe something about what you do. When you move to consideration, the question becomes, are you considering serving with this organization? And if they say yes to that, that means they're somewhere in the mix where they're beginning to learn about you. They're beginning to learn the heart of your ministry. They're hearing about projects that you do, why you exist, what's the problem that you are there to solve. So they're beginning to think about who you are and how you fit with them and their interests and their passions. And then the third stage of the funnel we're going to talk about is usage. And so this is where, and obviously there's lots of different ways you can call that. That's a pretty standard marketing word, but will you reach out to learn more? And so if they say yes, and they raise their hand and say, I really want to know more about what it looks like to do a project with you, we would consider that a lead. And so that is in our little example today that we're using, that is the objective of marketing. in this organization. That would be a lead. So again, really important to remember that that's not the end of the journey for our audience member. It's perhaps the handoff between marketing and another organization or another part of the organization. But we know that for them to actually move towards your key metric, they're going to have to engage with another group and begin the application process and agree to keep going down that line. So just helpful to call out, that's not the end of the story for them, but it is perhaps where marketing has the biggest impact, is getting them to that point. So I'll pause for a second in our example just to make a bit of an aside, that as you're thinking about the funnel and how to use this with your work, it's really important to do this exercise. So you come up with your funnel and you say, these are the stages, that makes sense. And then the reality check is going to be to take all of your marketing efforts, every communication piece you make, every email you send, your social media channels, your print pieces, and really think about where does each of those fit into this funnel. And is it, which category does it belong to? So you can ask questions like, well, what's the goal of this tactic? Who am I really talking to? And how do I know if it's successful? Am I asking my audience to do anything? And how do I know if they've done it? And so this is just a really helpful, like a mini audit that you can do on your own of your marketing efforts and begin to see where you're investing time, where you're investing resources. Maybe you're super high and spend a lot of time at the awareness level, but don't have as many tools that speak to the other two sections. Or maybe it's the opposite. And so this is a very helpful way. And you may find pieces, this is super common, you may find pieces where you're like, I don't know why we do this. We just do it. And that's a fantastic opportunity to either evaluate that tool and say, hey, we don't really need to do this, or maybe we need to tweak it and actually be more intentional about what this tool is accomplishing. Why do we send these emails once a month? What is the point of these? And until you can answer that, you just know that you can invest your time in better ways. So hopefully that's a helpful way to think about using this to even audit your current processes. So then we come to the idea of measurement. And so once you have your funnel, you've thought about the different stages, you've figured out, begin to put your communication pieces into these phases and kind of clean up the funnel in your own mind and understand where it's all going. It is really important to start thinking about measuring and even putting goals against those measures. So in our example today, where we're trying to get leads, we threw in some pretty standard ways you could measure different parts of the funnel. So under awareness, you might have unique visitors to your website. You might have impressions from ad buys. So how many eyeballs are seeing your ads that you've put out there? That's some level of awareness. In that second section of consideration, these are all the ways that your audience starts to interact with you and maybe consume resources. So it could be number of email signups, people who say, yeah, I want to learn more about them. I want to hear what they're doing. People following you on social media. Maybe it's people using resources or downloading things from your website, going to specific areas of your website that really signal they're engaging with your material. Those would be measures for that middle section. And then usage, that is where the measure becomes, they're raising their hand to ask more information about going on a project, about doing the short-term project with you, and that generates a lead. And so once you have your measures, you would begin to put goals against those, which are actual numbers, where you'd say, hey, last year, we did X number, whereas this next year, we hope to increase that by 50%, or we want to do, we have 100 people on our list and we want to get 200. Goals, there's nothing objectively right or wrong about goals, but it gives you a benchmark to understand where you've been and where you're trying to go. And so we take the idea of those measures and the goals, and a scorecard is a super helpful and simple tool to help your team, as well as others in your organization, see marketing's value. So this is just a very simple template of what a scorecard could look like for marketing, where you pull this report weekly or monthly, and you begin to see the progress you're making you begin to see areas where you want to improve. And it becomes something that's shareable to others in your organization. So maybe different amounts of detail are helpful to different people in your organization, but having it all contained in one spot is really helpful. And I'm going to pause for a minute as you guys are thinking about questions. And actually, I'd love to call on Dan and get him to just add some commentary about how he's seen scorecards be useful in the past. And I think you're muted.
Sorry, first time on Zoom. Yeah, these can be amazing. I think maybe my shortcut way to think about scorecards is that they can be both like a shield and a sword. And this is what I mean, is the shield is like, it allows you to say no with a really good reason. So somebody comes to you, often an executive, perhaps an older person, and says, hey, I've heard about this TikTok. Let's get on the TikToks. Can we get on the TikToks? And you're like, oh, like, no, that's not part of our plan. That's not our audience. That means nothing. And so you can hold up your scorecard and say, great, tell me what to take off. If you want us to do this TikTok initiative, what should I take off based on this plan? And if you want me to add it, great. I got to give you budget, people, dollars, whatever. So like, it's a shield to be able to say no to things that are good, but not better than what we currently have. The second is a sword, which is like when it comes time for, and I kind of mean this financially, when it comes time for like budgeting and saying to leadership, hey, you're like strategically as an organization, we're trying to grow like a number of like short-term teams that go out, a number of missionaries, obviously you can go to the donors, all these different key metrics that Audrey talked about. Like part of your sword is marketing, and Heather's term of lead gen is right on, where you can say like, hey, if you want to do that, like I've got a proven model that can give you more of the thing that you want. So what I need is more dollars or resources or people to be able to make that happen. And in some ways, what it does, it establishes like, whoa, you really clarify your role and the role of marketing in the organization. I love Audrey's term for like, part of your job is to marketing, which, yeah, I get really excited about. So I think the scorecard can be both a shield and a sword. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Helpful?
Cool, thanks. Yeah.
This is great. Let me just jump in here. Dan, your scenario about an executive saying, we need to do this, or I think there's probably a number of people who are on this webinar right now who have experienced the tyranny of other people's ideas.
Yeah.
And I like how you've presented how this can allow people who are working in marketing and communications to come back with a meaningful no or yes, and also to be able to take better initiative and show their leadership kind of what the most valuable thing for it is for them to do is. Excellent. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would even just maybe add to that, like even I'm gonna extend the metaphor of the shield, where like, yes, you're trying to protect your budget and your team and your own workload. And so I really value that, like thinking about your organization. I also believe, and this is like some of the philosophy that we like work in under at our organization at Kumveka is, we also believe that you are the audience's advocates, right? So like in your organization, like who's going to, like you desire to serve them, but are you also like protecting them from, like, frankly, you're like, you want to protect them. And so like part of thinking about, so Audrey mentioned the idea of doing personas, that's linked back to like doing research. Like, are you building a plan that's going to serve them well? And when somebody introduces something else that's like, maybe it's a miss, like something like, whatever, TikTok I'm beating up on, but like it can be a distraction, which is not neutral, right? So like it is, it can either like help or hurt you, even if it just means watering down the message that you're putting out there. So yeah, so I would very much advocate for you positioning yourself as advocates in the organization. And I think you can do it with passion is good, but you can also do it with data, which is even better. And it doesn't have to be expensive. And so we do both qualitative and quantitative. There are ways to do it using best practices that really allow you to walk into a room and saying like, wait, like that's not best for our audiences. And ultimately, if we do this well, what's best for our audiences also serves the mission that we're trying to accomplish.
Yes, such great points. Really appreciate you guys bringing those up. Super helpful. So I'm going to actually just go into our little wrap-up section, and love for you guys to be thinking about questions you have, or even if you just want to share, like, hey, this was really helpful, like this idea, thanks for sharing that. Like any of that is helpful for us to hear, but definitely want to leave time for questions at the end. But as you're thinking about what to do with all of this today, again, I just want to go back to what are the big questions that we're trying to wrestle with. And really, I think the first one is, how does your marketing further your organization's mission? And so I hope you've seen through some of those tools today, how you can begin to answer that question even more confidently, perhaps, than you have in the past, where you can really tie it together. And there's a value equation from the mission of your organization to why you post this on your website, why you send this email, and what that does for your audience and how that is furthering your mission. So I think we've seen some ways to begin making those connections. And then the really important question that I don't think is self-serving, because I think it helps those in your organization, really to help others begin to see more the value of your marketing efforts. And so, a lot of good conversation around that we've had already. If you have specific questions, we'd love to hear those too. And so here are just some general next steps. Like what are some things you could take away in the next couple of weeks and start working on against the things we talked about today. And so I would just encourage you to really do that work of sitting down for an hour or two and thinking about your mission and how marketing connects to it, using the tools like the key metrics and that journey map, your audience journey. Then from that, you'll get the idea of your marketing objective, and you can have real clarity to say, this is what we're about. This is all of our efforts actually lead to this lead gen or whatever the pieces you decide. And you can begin to talk about that in your team and across your organization, and just bring that clarity to others as well. And if you're not doing much with measuring right now, I just say pick a couple things to start measuring and talk about them. Don't overwhelm yourself with 50 different metrics that you're keeping track of, but start with maybe one for each section of your funnel. Just get in the habit of keeping tabs on those and looking at them and figuring out how you can impact them. And that brings us to the fourth idea, which is really just begin to prioritize areas to improve. So once you have that funnel, once you begin to see your metrics, you can make a choice and you make decisions strategically for your organization. Where do you want to see the needle move? Do you need to work on awareness? Is that really where the opportunity is? Or do you have tons of people maybe on your email list who just have not been asked or haven't been asked in the right way to take the next step? And so maybe your effort over the next 6 months is going to be to create a campaign to really think about them and how you can begin to engage them more in your mission. So once you prioritize those areas, and then you build strategies to deliver on whatever that metric is. So those are just some ideas. Love to hear where else you guys are. And there's my contact information as well as Heather's. Welcome to reach out at any point with other thoughts or questions. But Heather, Dan, anything you want to add, you're welcome to jump in. And if not, Heather, happy to field any questions that you have or that have come in through the chat.
Let me just mention this one question that's come in is Stephen is asking, is it possible to get a template for the marketing scorecard? Is that something that you could provide to this group?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's obviously kind of a generic template in here, but that is something that we can offer as well. Great question.
I don't have any other questions in the chat, so I'd say Audrey and Dan, anything else that you have that you want to summarize? This has been excellent information. I think it'll be very useful. Yep, and they've got a number saying thank you here in the chat already. But anything else that you want to say to wrap up?
My is a question to the audience, and like part of the gift to the speaker is knowing like what was helpful and what was maybe missing. And so as we desire, like frankly, you're our audience, and so we think about your needs. all the time. And like, how do we better create like trainings and tools that actually fit you? And so like, that's the thing that we wrestle with. And so I would even just kind of ask, are there, as you think about the content that we've shared today, like what was helpful? So like, it's kind of good to know that. And then also what was missing, maybe I'll do that. And so you can do this via email, like to Audrey is great. But if there's any brave souls out there, because right now you're all just pictures and names, that would love, that's, I saw Heather's face and I got, because we're all friends here. And so if there's things that like, even if it's like, hey, this one idea was kind of helpful, good, man, we're gonna keep that in. And if there's something like, oh yeah, this was not quite clear, like you could help us, and hope by giving us that kind of feedback.
Somebody has commented just that they think that this will be helpful even for their own personal support raising. So
that's awesome. Hey, Stephen, I see you on video. How's it going?
Good, thanks. Yeah, I found I forgot what you called it, but like the 10 steps, you're kind of showing people from nothing to where we wanted to get them to go. And just also thinking what part of this is marketing and what part of this is somebody else. That was very helpful. I'm a part of a smaller organization where I basically do pretty much everything, but having it delineated out, like this is marketing and this is something else happening, and maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe somebody else should be taking that over. That was very helpful for me. Also, the marketing scorecard. I like numbers, but I have these reports that I write. They're just a bunch of texts and I have pictures and stuff, and I don't think it communicates so well with everybody else. So I think something laid out just very simply like that, it would be very helpful for me to communicate to others saying, look, simple numbers, 1, 2, 3, here we are. So those are both very helpful.
Awesome. Thanks. I really appreciate you sharing those.
Somebody has said what we actually need is a Dan Kennedy TikTok.
Okay. I'm going to find that person. Yeah, that'll be the end of TikTok if that ever happens. If we're just, I know me and my rhythm. We don't want that.
Somebody else says that they really appreciate the nuggets and the simple approach to the funnel and considering metrics. Somebody else has said they'd love to hear more about branding metrics and how that works. Somebody else has said that they came from sales to church work a few months ago and that it's great to see how marketing applies to the church. And they've also experienced that feeling that marketing is a bad word. And somebody else has mentioned they just love the focus on personal engagement and the scorecard. So that scorecard has been pretty popular. So, yeah.
Audrey, do you want to talk through brand scorecard a little bit? Just some ideas there.
Yeah. Do you want to start off on that?
Sure. Yeah, and I think that in the same way, like it really is a whole nother webinar, but we do love brand work in our organization, and like all things, like you can measure it, and I love the caveats about being careful what to measure. I think that's really helpful. But even in brand, like if you've got a clear brand strategy in place, then you can measure it. And so if you're clear, and so we think about brand strategy really having kind of 3 components. We think about it as having a persona, which is, we've already talked about a little bit. So we're clear about who we're targeting. We have a promise, which is kind of like maps like a benefit, and then a proof. So those are, and it maps pretty closely to a messaging strategy, but a brand, like in its simplicity, like really is that, what do you want to be to the marketplace? And so if you just take those 2 ideas of a promise, or like what are they going to get from it? Then you can ask your audience, like, hey, is that true? Like, do you experience us as have you received that benefit or promise from us? And then the second piece of that, when we think about that matrix, is the proof aspect. And so like, hey, if we say like, yep, like you can, if you whatever, go with us on a short-term team, like we've got a great fundraising support process. Like, you may say that, but they get to decide whether that's true or not, and how they've experienced that. So like, you can go back and like test your brand based on, and it's really about perceptions of your audience. And that's really what a brand lives in the mind of your audience ultimately. And so they get to decide whether your brand is healthy or not, but you got to do something about it. So I think and I love Audrey's push for like, it only takes a few metrics to be able to have like some level of like discipline in your scorecard for marketing. The same thing is true for brand, right? So like, what are the few things that we really want to stand for? And if we're not standing for that, and we can, demonstrate that like in a quantitative survey, then we have bigger issues to fix. We've got to do this smaller levels, but we've done extensive work for International Mission Board, and we actually did something a longitudinal. How do you say that? A long-term
longitudinal.
Thank you. Study of International Mission Board's brand, and like even took them through a rebrand, established these core things that they wanted to be about, and said, okay, great. Like they were they desire to serve pastors. And so the truth is like, well, is it true in the minds of pastors that we stand for all these things? And so we got a really clear scorecard that became like a report card in some way that said, okay, great, from the brand, like these are the things that we need to go fix. So I hope that's a helpful kind of start to like how to think about a brand scorecard, but it goes back to like, do you really have a defined brand strategy? And then like, can we go measure those things? And I think the answer is yes. Audrey, what am I missing out of that?
Yeah, no, that's great. I was actually getting to read back through some of the comments, and Jeff earlier said, hey, brand strategy really starts, or brand positioning starts everything. And I just want to like double click and say, yes, like I completely agree with that. We chose, just for having too much content, we chose really not to talk much about brand today in this conversation, but it is absolutely key to, all of the strategies you choose, all of the messaging that comes out is really going to be tied explicitly, very closely back to your brand. And I'd argue even, as you think about the audience experience, while marketing might play a key role in this, this first part, how your mobilization team engages with your audience is all about your brand. Every single touch point that you have with your audience is impacting your brand in some way. And so there's just a whole other conversation about the role that brand plays, that it's essentially, it's almost like it's a multiplier, in negative or positive, for every single thing you do across the organization. So I love that. Great question and comment about brand.
Don't see anything else in the chat. Somebody is asking, do you have any books you recommend on this subject? And then one other person was asking if Dan could put your email address, could put that in the chat or tell us what it is. They would like to be able to ask you some further questions as well.
Similar to Audrey's, I'll put it in the chat here. Yeah, and we're both on LinkedIn as well. Yeah. Okay, Audrey, what are your books you recommend?
Oof, I did not come prepared with a book list today. I think that's one I have to take for homework. I'm not sure I have anything off the top of my head.
I guess the ones that I like, books that I love, like, and it's not really even on this topic as much as, but I think it applies, is like Made to Stick by the Heath brothers, and I'll just type it in here, Made to Stick. Is one of my favorites, and it just talks about how do you make a message, and ultimately like a brand. I think ultimately, like, how do you make it like stick or sticky with your audiences? And it's just there's things that we literally use with every single client that are in that book. One we call it, I'm not sure they refer to it as the Pomelo principle. I won't talk about it now, but like it's awesome, and like is very much has shaped how we think about messaging and frankly being compassionate in our communication. So we'll have to wrestle with that one until Audrey writes her book. Then we can we'll go for it.
Thanks.
I don't think we have anything else. Any other final comments, Audrey or Dan?
No, this has been really fun. I really appreciate the engagement. And I think there's a lot more here, but it's been great to be with you guys today.
Great. Thank you very much. Audrey and Dan as well. Thank you also to everyone who joined and participated with us. I'm Heather Pubels, along with Mary Kay, our producer.